My name is Stuart Sutton, and I've been asked to talk with you briefly about how I approach teaching LIS 550, Information in Social Context. I believe that the primary goal of LIS 550 is to give students a solid sense of the social context in which their practice will take place. Students spend a lot of time getting a good handle on the knowledge and skills of that practice. They learn how to assess user needs, and they learn how to build services and systems to serve those needs, and they learn organizational mechanisms. And what LIS 550 asks them to do is to lift their eyes to the horizon and to actually take a look at the social context in which all of those activities that they will be engaged in are embedded. Now, there are a lot of ways to approach the subject matter of LIS 550, depending on the background of the instructors. For example, the course can be approached purely as a policy course, in other words, through a policy perspective. It can be approached through a philosophical or humanistic perspective, and also an historical perspective. It can also be looked at in terms of normative mechanisms and of social control. In other words, what laws, policies, and so forth are in place that will affect how the professional works. Now, all of these various perspectives provide an instructor with an architecture. And the perspective that's used generally flows out of the background of that instructor. Now, in the information school, as an interdisciplinary school, we have faculty teaching LIS 550 that come from a rich array of backgrounds. So there are instances of the course that will have the flavor of philosophy as their controlling perspective, or have the flavor of policy as their controlling architecture. All of them, however, address the same subject matter. And I think it's important to note that all of these various perspectives are legitimate exercises of LIS 550. Let me talk a little bit about my perspective. Now, I was educated as an intellectual property lawyer. So the approach I use in this subject matter is what I call a survey, and going in as much depth as we possibly can into the normative mechanisms that affect and control how we as professionals perform our duties. So in my section of LIS 550, we ask, what are the operative mechanisms that will control how I practice? And those range from ethical, personal ethics and professional ethics through the law of copyright, the laws of privacy, even liability, for information liability, where we provide information that injures. We look at all of the normative mechanisms out there, including contract and licensing. In other words, those things that will help shape our interactions as professionals with the outside world. That normative focus means frequently, in terms of readings, that I will select primary sources, in other words, actual legal cases and policy documents, as opposed to a different perspective that might pick secondary readings that are commentary on those. Both perfectly legitimate, but come from different backgrounds. It's my assumption that this approach, my approach, helps the student in practice by giving them a framework to set off signals when they are entering into territory that are controlled by some of these mechanisms. So when asked to do something in terms of photocopying for a patron, for example, little red sirens will go off if, in fact, they are approaching the margins of what is legally permissible. It doesn't teach them, it doesn't turn them into lawyers, but it gives them enough so that they know when it's time to call one, when they're being asked to do something that violates either law or ethics. So I think it provides them with that mechanism, plus gives them a voice, an authoritative way of talking about these mechanisms of social control so that they can engage in policy debates and can be effective advocates for the environments and organizations in which they work. So that's pretty much it. So thanks for listening.